Welcome to Parenting Great Kids, Katya.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
So let's start with the basics. Can you walk us through the signs and symptoms of ADHD in children? Because a lot of parents suspect their child might have it and are worried about it, but they don't know what they do.
Absolutely. So, when we're wondering about the possibility of ADHD, there are three things we're looking for in particular. We're looking for difficulty focusing and sustaining attention, particularly when the child is presented with an activity that they do not particularly like. We are looking at difficulty inhibiting impulses. That could be behavioral impulsivity, like I'm going to poke the other kid in class, or I'm going to cut in line, or it could be impulsivity as regards the child's approach to their work, so rushing through, making careless mistakes. It can look different in different people. And the last thing that we're looking for in particular is difficulty regulating the activity level, so the fidgety, sort of on the go, restless, can't sit still, can't remain seated type aspect. So we're looking for some combination of those three things. There are different subtypes of ADHD, so you may see someone who is predominantly showing the more distractible, inattentive, sort of daydreamy type side, which would be an inattentive presentation. Or you may see someone who has more of the behavioral regulation type side, which would be a hyperactive impulsive presentation. Or you may see all of the above, the combined presentation. The inattentive and the combined are the two most commonly diagnosed presentations.
You know, you're absolutely right. This is what I typically see, and I'm sure you do too. I have a 7 or 8-year-old come in, and mom or dad is very worried. And they say, you know, we're having issues at school, and the teacher says he probably has ADHD. Will you help me? And before I go into testing, which you do, I like to explain to parents that there are things that mask as ADHD. For instance, if a child has dyslexia, he can't sit there and read. Or if a child has depression and just lost a grandmother, he's not going to be able to focus. So when a patient comes into your office and they come in and sit down and they say, Dr. Fredrickson, worried my child has ADHD. Tell me what you do.
And so you may be thinking, well, so aren't lots of kids, right? Isn't this hard for lots of kids? Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Aren't kids supposed to have trouble staying on task if they're bored? And aren't they supposed to be energetic and fidgety? And so, yeah, absolutely. What you need to do is really think about whether what you're seeing is, in fact, perhaps developmentally appropriate. And perhaps your expectations are not quite, you may have your expectations set a little bit high, or school staff may, or grandparents, or whoever is concerned about the issue. Certainly among our younger kids, sort of 5, 6, 7, I'm always very, very mindful and cautious before making a diagnosis. You really need to see that something that is out of the ordinary for that age range. A, and B, you need to see whatever the issue in question is, you need to see it in more than one place. Okay, so if you have a child who's inattentive at school, perhaps the child is anxious, perhaps they have a learning vulnerability and they're having trouble keeping up, perhaps they have a language comprehension issue. It could be all kinds of different things. So it could be more to do with the environment than something to do with the child, him or herself in particular. And so that's why it's really important to observe the issues. We want parents to see them, and or teachers, and or coaches, and or evaluators, pediatricians, etc., just to be sure that it's a real thing and not an artifact of a particular environment the child finds him or herself in.
I love it because so many times I hear, a patient come in, it's another doctor's, is taking care of them, and I just happen to see him because they're sick. And I hear a story like this. I went into my pediatrician and I spoke with him or her about ADHD, and she gave me a prescription on that day for Concerta. Now, my take is, wait. Before we're going to give you your child a stimulant, it's very important to get the diagnosis correct, because it doesn't help a child to treat them with ADHD if they really have anxiety, or if they really have depression, or if they have both. On the other hand, you gave an exhaustive or comprehensive description of the length that you can go to diagnose ADHD, and also to tease out if there's anything underneath it, like autism. Many parents don't have the time to do what you're talking about, which is too bad. But they also don't want to just go into a pediatrician and walk out with a prescription. So what is the balance there with a garden variety parent with a 10-year-old that's bouncy and can't focus and so forth? They go into their pediatrician. What should happen next? Because we are the doorway for our patients.
So that, in my opinion, is the beauty of the neuropsychological evaluation, because it looks at a broad array of different skills and areas of development, so that, say for one of the examples you just raised, we will be looking at reading to see if there's a learning disorder. We will be looking at, emotional functioning to see if there's anxiety. We'll be looking at all of those other potential co-occurring or interfering variables in order to parse out what's the primary vulnerability and what may be sort of secondary or accompanying things that the child is struggling with. So the process of neuropsychological assessment includes it's a lot of time that goes into it. We meet with parents, depending on the nature of the referral question, for 1 to 2 hours to do an intake. So we do a very thorough sort of review of the history. We obtain standardized questionnaire data from parents so that we can compare, how they describe their child to how other parents with children the same age describe their children. We obtain standardized questionnaire data from teachers as well. We speak to teachers. We speak to therapists, speech, language pathologists, whoever is involved, psychiatrists, whoever is involved in the child's care, or we make an effort to speak with everyone, because the child can look quite different in different environments depending on the nature of the demands. And then we sit down with the child. We do 2 separate testing sessions, each of which lasts between 3 and 4 hours, so a total of sort of 6 to 7 hours. And we look at a broad array of skills. We look at cognitive functioning, so sort of verbal, visual, spatial reasoning skills. We look at how well the child processes information, their speed, their memory. We look at their fine motor skills. We do a lot of testing of language skills just to ferret out anything that might be going on there. Again, because language comprehension vulnerability can look like attention vulnerability, so we need to be really careful. We do formal testing of attention, impulse control, organization, and other executive functions. We look closely at academics and the core domains of reading, writing, and math. And we always do a socio-emotional component, again, depending on the nature of the referral. That may be more in depth, or it may be a less prominent aspect, depending. But we're always looking to see how the child is doing socially in their natural milieu at school, and how they do in the testing environment. We're assessing for anxiety and depressed mood. And so that, at the very beginning of our conversation, you mentioned how ADHD can co-occur with other things. There can be overlaps. And so we really want to be able to come back at the end and say, hey, well, first of all, here's what your child is really good at. I mean, that's a very important aspect of the evaluation process. It's not just a problem-focused course of action. Here's what your child is really good at. Here are the things that are more difficult. When you put those things together, that points to potentially XYZ diagnosis. And here's what would be helpful at home, at school, in other settings to make your child feel as comfortable as possible, be as successful as possible.
Often we see boys and girls present differently. In my experience, boys tend to be more hyperactive along with their attention, and girls tend to be have difficulty, be more inattentive without the hyperactivity. Is that real, or is that just my anecdotal experience?
I'd say that your anecdotal experience matches up with what we see empirically as well. In general, girls with ADHD are more likely to present with that more inattentive presentation that we discussed earlier, which is more subtle, less readily noticeable, especially in the context of a larger classroom setting, and so are often caught later diagnostically. So again, speaking in generalities, your girl with ADHD is often quite bright and hardworking and wants to do well, and is working hard and compensating for the attention vulnerabilities up until a certain point. And that's when they typically show up in our office. It might be middle school where the wheels fall off the wagon as the workload increases, might be high school, might be college, might be adulthood. And so it's just the ones who we notice more are the ones who are, their behaviors stand out. And of course, in the context of a busy classroom, teachers can only do, they can only be expected to notice so much, right? They have a lot of responsibility on their hands. And so the ones who will most readily pop out to them are the ones who have the more noticeable behavioral regulation issues, more the hyperactive, impulsive type. And that, in generalities, again, tends to be boys. And it's interesting because, like many of our medical psychiatric conditions, early research was done more commonly with men, right? And so over time, as our diagnostic manual has evolved, initially there was more of an emphasis on those hyperactive impulsive elements, again, more common among males. And as our manual and our sort of thought processes evolve, we've become more aware of and attuned to those more subtle and attentive characteristics, which can be just as damaging. So this is, a question that very often comes up when you present, as I'm sure you know better than I do, when you present a new diagnosis to a family, and the question is, do I have to medicate my child? What does that mean? It's alarming and frightening for parents to think about the possibility of medication. That said, empirically speaking, it is the first tier recommended intervention for ADHD. So I always talk to my families about it and recommend that they consult with their pediatrician to learn more, and I provide them with various sorts of resources so they can do their own research as well. These medications have been in use with children for decades, and there's a lot of good long-term research on the safety and efficacy. And so I always encourage parents to learn more, and I may strongly encourage that in a case where the ADHD symptoms are having a significant negative impact. So in order to qualify for diagnosis in the first place, there needs to be a significant impact, but of course that varies by degrees. What I always personally think about, there are three sorts of things I use as a barometer. One is, are the symptoms in question disturbing the child's learning? So are they missing out on enough information that they are starting to fall behind? Number two, are the symptoms in question affecting the child socially? So again, if you have someone who's very inattentive or hyperactive impulsive, that can naturally have negative social ramifications and can lead to distress on the part of the child. And that leads me into my third thing I always look at is, what are the emotional implications? So are the characteristics in question leading to anxiety, self-esteem related vulnerabilities? And then, there are plenty of things that we can do that don't involve medication. Two types of, assuming we're in a public school, there are two types of plans that we can request the child be provided with. One is a 504 accommodation plan, which means that the child is receiving the typical academic curriculum, but there are modifications in terms of how it's being delivered or how the child is being treated in some way. So, for example, the child is given the accommodation flexible seating. So maybe they have like one of those wobbly cushions they can sit on, or one of those big exercise ball things, or the wobble chair. The child is given access, for example, to fidget toys. Keeping the hands busy can keep the mind focused, depending on the child. Sometimes the child is given access to additional breaks, opportunities to get up and move around, visual cues. So let's be sure to write up the instructions instead of just giving them verbally, in case the child was potentially out to lunch in that moment that you were delivering the verbal instructions. So there are all kinds of things we can request at school that can make the child's school day run more smoothly, but that sort of adhere to the typical curriculum. So again, accommodations. If we have a child who requires a direct service via school, then we would request an IEP, which stands for Individualized Education Plan or Program. I can never remember what the P is for. And so that would be if the child has, potentially there is, there's a higher incidence of learning disorders secondary to ADHD. So potentially the child has some learning vulnerabilities that are accompanying the ADHD, and we are requesting some specialized instruction to help boost up their skills. So that might be more of an IEP, although it really depends on the school and the district in terms of what they'll offer. Sometimes there's more flexibility, sometimes less, in terms of what can be offered under each individual plan. And then private schools are their own sort of ball game, but will typically also have some form of accommodation plan available, and potentially specialized interventions depending on the school. So there's plenty we can ask for at school, and it varies across the ages. As kids get older, we can ask for additional executive functioning support, sort of organizational supports. help managing their classes and their homework assignments and breaking down tasks and maybe having a study hall and extended time on tests. So lots and lots of things that can be very, very helpful and can really allow children to flourish. And we can also extend those accommodations to the university level if it's required. And in terms of home, never let it be said that a parent will cause ADHD. We know that's a developmental condition, but there are certainly parenting strategies that can help make home life smoother for a child with ADHD. So I always talk to families about these ideas. For example, I think it's very important to, children in general, we know benefit from structure and routine, but particularly if you think about a child having additional difficulty self-regulating, there really is benefit from a higher degree of external regulation, i.e. external structure, to help them sort of keep themselves together, right? So like a regular routine when it comes to the morning and the evening and the afternoon. Does that mean that, oh gosh, it's 4:01, we need to transition to X activity? No, not necessarily, but like a sequence of events. We come home from school, we have a snack and some downtime, then we do homework, then we do this, then we do that. We have an expectable, predictable, structured routine can be very organizing for kids. So that sort of thing. I always recommend the use of, again, similar to what we were talking about in the classroom, if you give a child with ADHD a long string of verbal instructions, any parent of a child with ADHD will know that that is not the most effective way of getting things done, right? So it helps to have visuals. That's right up the steps, and of course you vary this based on the child's age and developmental level. That's right up the steps of your morning routine, your evening routine, the steps to pack your backpack, the steps to clean your room, whatever it is. We're going to post it on your wall, and then instead of having to hover over you and redirect you every second, it's sort of like go and do your list, go and do your list. It increases the child's sense of independence. You can tie in a reward system to that to really motivate the child and give them lots of positive reinforcement. In general, a lot of emphasis on catching them being good and positive reinforcement is important. We know that kids with ADHD on average receive a lot more negative feedback throughout the course of the day, which is a sad thing. There's a lot of don't do this, stop that, why are you doing that, etc., etc. And, as a parent, I find myself having to be really careful about that too. And so we really want to be sure to try to balance that. I think I've read that for every sort of negative comment, you're supposed to have 5 positive comments. And of course, I am not sitting here with my tally sheet keeping track, but it's a good sort of rule of thumb just to bear in mind. And sleep. I shouldn't forget to mention sleep. Health behaviors. So common sense nutrition and hydration, regular exercise, and really having adequate sleep. And you can look online to find different hours of sleep that are recommended for different age ranges, and trying to be sure to preserve that aspect of your child's day and protect it, because we know that a child who's chronically sleep deprived can look just like a kid with ADHD because it affects them so strongly.
Let's talk about external stimulation, audio, visual stimulation. For instance, a lot of boys like to play a lot of video games, and parents will say, but what I don't understand is that he can sit and play a very active, engaging video game for 2 hours. So he can't have ADHD. Talk about what audio stimulation and visual stimulation through screens, what effect that has on kids with ADHD.
Well, so my understanding is that kids with I think any of us who are parents can say that kids in general are not great at regulating their own screen time, and I think many of us can also acknowledge that adults are not necessarily that good at it either. But then you just add on an extra degree of difficulty when you're thinking of someone with ADHD. And part of what's hard about it is that the screen is a very relaxing and attractive sort of pastime. And so we do sometimes have families come in and say, oh, well, I don't, Jimmy can't have ADHD. He can play video games for hours. And it's the idea, I think attention deficit hyperactivity disorder is a bit of a misnomer, that deficit piece. It's really more of a regulation, attention dysregulation, such that kids with ADHD are generally really good at staying on task for extended periods of time if they're engaged in an activity they find stimulating, which may, in some cases or in many cases, screen time may be one of those. But if you present them with an activity that is boring or they dislike or is stressful, it's much more difficult to implement those same skills. So I never presume necessarily to give parents specific recommendations about exact amounts of screen time. What I tend to think more about is ensuring that the amount of time the child is spending on screen time is not detracting or removing them from other more productive activities. So if it's keeping them from sleep, from family mealtime, from playing outside, from doing homework, then I think we have a problem. But I wouldn't, I never, and perhaps you do, you may be more sort of advanced, more up on this than I am, but I don't give specific exact time frames, but just more attention to how it's affecting the child's functioning in other areas and their capacity to do other important things or more important things.
Right. Well, I mean, there are problems with video games that I've seen in boys who don't even have ADHD. Um, it's like the longer they play, the longer they want to play. But that's a whole separate issue. There's also questions parents have about diet, and I've seen people, put their kids on keto diets or gluten-free diets. Or is there any scientific evidence for any changes in diet that will help kids with ADHD?
Not that I'm aware of, not that I've seen. So I think, again, thinking of diet from a common sense perspective and sugar intake, that sort of thing, I think for any child, again, is something to be aware of in the sense of the energy increase following the sugar followed by the crash. But I'm not aware of any research supporting specific diets associated with ADHD. Now, you do certainly hear anecdotal stories about that. You do hear parents say, "Oh well, I removed red food dyes from my child's diet, or I did this or that, and it had this magnificent effect." And so, I'm happy for that family in particular that had that experience, but it doesn't necessarily speak to a broader effect or phenomenon. And we also don't know what other interventions might have been going on at the same time that they removed whatever the thing was from the child's diet. I understand that parents are, we all want the best for our kids, and so we're willing to try lots of different things to help them in any way we can. Um, in general, I tend to feel if something is not actively harmful or problematic and a parent wants to try it, I wouldn't go against it, but nor would I necessarily pin my hopes on it. And I wouldn't try it at the same time that I was trying something else, because then you can't, of course, tell what thing had whatever the effect is that you end up seeing.
Yeah. Now, we only have a couple minutes left, but many parents who have a child with ADHD, particularly hyperactive boys, really struggle because for many, many reasons, I think. A, they're exhausting. B, they feel like they're constantly saying, stop that, stop that, stop that. And C, because they worry that about their child having ADHD and that he's going to feel ostracized and that he maybe feels, of course, different than anybody else or dumb. But it's very hard for parents to deal, I think, with their own frustration and anxiety and anger. What tips do you give parents who are really struggling with a child who's really hard to live with at times?
A parent, in the sense of acknowledging that some kids can be hard to live with for large chunks of time or for big pieces of the day, and it's okay for us to feel frustrated and upset about those things. It's a natural reaction. I think many parents punish themselves and feel guilty. I shouldn't feel this way, etc. Shouldn't is not really a useful word, I think, when it comes to feelings, because feelings are what they are. And the more we try to tamp them down, right, the more difficult they can become. So, I mean, I think I know it sounds corny, but it makes me think of the, put on your own mask first kind of scenario from the airplane. We do need to, and I know it can be hard, but we do need to try to take the time to prioritize ourselves at times as parents and be sure that we're getting what we need so that we can give our child what they need. And I think we need to try to be kind to ourselves because parenting is a tough road to hoe. And some kids are substantially harder to parent than others. And there's the whole Facebook phenomenon, right, where you log on and all these people are showing their idyllic family pictures and their vacations, and it makes you feel worse about your own life. So you got to just be careful of that.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and you've in your home looking at Facebook with your 6-year-old who's pounding on his 3-year-old brother. I'm so glad you said that, because I think that for parents, there's a lot of guilt. They feel, if I love this child, how can I feel so angry, and how can I feel so negative about him all the time? Well, you can feel negative and be very, very frustrated and love your child. And so I really think it's important for parents, particularly mothers, to get over the guilt of feeling very upset and angry at their child. And I try to say to them, you're not angry at your child, you're angry at the ADHD. And this is very hard for you to live with. So try to separate those out. My guest has been Dr. Katja Fredrickson. She, along with Dr. Rothman, a pediatric neuropsychologist, wrote a book that's fabulous called Different Thinkers. It's a book on ADHD for elementary school age children. And I wish we had time to go into that. The nice thing about that is that people can leave this podcast and go get your book and read it, because it's really, really wonderful. You know, many professionals invest in an executive coach for personal development and a trainer for physical fitness. Now you can hire me, a best-selling author and expert coach, to help you raise great kids. I've over 35 years practicing pediatrics and an extensive experience decoding what your kids need and think about you. I've helped countless parents just like you. You can talk directly with me through private or group coaching. I'll listen and provide a customized plan to help you be the best dad you can be. Sign up now through the link in the episode notes. Your kids are counting on you. Let's make your family's future brighter together.